Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Thomas and welcome to this month's webinar here at the BCS Cheltenham Branch. Here at the BCS, we organize monthly talks focusing on a wide range of areas in computing and our webinars are intended to facilitate an engaging and interactive session with with the community at large. So we organize monthly webinar talks here at the Cheltenham and Gloucester branch. So please keep joining in if you are so interested. So for our talk today, we are joined by Mr. Stephen Colling, who is going to give us a talk on the role of remote working and video conferencing and whether or not it is going to be the norm moving forward, which we believe is quite a relevant topic considering the manner in which we are working at the moment. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Stephen, who is going to give us more details on the role of remote working and video conferencing. So Stephen, over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your time. So yeah, my name's Steve Curling. I'm the Regional Director here for Starleaf. So yeah, the subjects I just wanted to sort of share some thoughts and ideas around today based on what we've seen from a wide range of customers, in the corporate space and public sector space. Is remote working and video conferencing here to stay? I think we've all experienced the use of video conferencing over the last 12 months. Obviously, as a result of the pandemic, which has been unfortunate. But I think the reality is that a lot of people have been thrust into the use of video conferencing as a way of communicating with people. So yeah, I think for me, and let's talk about a couple of things right around this. I'm just actually struggling to share the next slide on my screen, so just bear with me a second. There we go. Right, so I guess just sort of break it down. I've sort of broke it into a couple of different discussion points really to give you some views. It's not personal views, what we've seen within the marketplace. So let's tackle a couple of these. So, the first one, how did businesses adopt change and how easy was it to implement remote working? As I've said, right, this was an unfortunate set of circumstances because of COVID, and a lot of organizations, some were using video conferencing technology and some weren't. Some their culture was very much about being seen, being visible, seeing customers in person, traveling on planes, etc., etc. And obviously, that changed. And I think the honest answer is organizations adapted to that change at some very different rates, because a lot of it was driven by their culture. It was sort of forced upon them in some ways, but ultimately they had to adapt. And I think that, as I've said, we've seen, different organizations in different verticals adapt quicker, perhaps slower. Even now, the shift towards video, where people are still meeting with people, people even now still don't actually turn the cameras on, right? Which is really what, true video conferencing is. I think what we saw was a lot of organizations where they hadn't adopted a video first strategy or part video or part UC strategy, went and implemented solutions that they found that were quick and easy, more around quick and easy to access, in all honesty, and perhaps where they perceived that a solution was free. A personal view in life is that nothing is free. Somewhere along the line, you'll end up having to pay for that. So I think a lot of organizations put solutions in very quickly. They use them to the best of their ability, based on the availability of webcams and headsets. And I think over time, People have adapted their environments to suit their working lives. I think what we also saw was a lot of solutions were implemented by IT, and it was very hard for IT teams to capture what the needs and requirements are. And I think what we're now seeing is people are looking more to, okay, great, well, we implemented a solution, in part it's working, in part it's delivering experience, but what do we want to do going forward? How do we want to meet and collaborate with people? That sort of ties in with, you know, my second point really. So have solutions been implemented based on technology rather than being based on their long-term user requirements? I think that's a trend that we've seen. You know, they had to deploy things quickly, rapidly, get people up to speed, remote working, different countries, cross borders, something that people would never have done. So a lot of the solutions that we saw were based on that technology part, and obviously that evaluation is now being you know, looked at in terms of what their longer term strategy is. And I guess the third part is really actually for me, the fundamental part is it's all about the culture that you create and how and what part technology plays and what part does video conferencing play as part of your business. And the organizations that we've seen and that continue to be successful are the ones that have adopted and will continue to adopt that culture even after the pandemic has obviously reduced or ceased or whatever form it takes. And this is where we're hearing a lot of things about hybrid working, which is a term that's, you know, appeared quite significantly. And, you know, hybrid working, I think is here to stay, and it will depend on the culture of that organization, the roles in which the individuals play in that organization. You know, there was a recent article that was published by Unilever, and, you know, they said themselves, we are not going back to the office full time. They've identified they need to provide this flexible working hybrid culture, but they need technologies to underpin that. And I keep saying technologies because for us at Starleaf, I think for anyone that implements technology, it shouldn't be about the technology, it should be how the user uses it. It should be simple and it should be intuitive to use, but culture plays a massive part. So if that top-down culture exists and the business is willing to identify that that needs to evolve over a period of time, then I think that will be the organizations that are being successful. But it's also culture, not just internally, but how they will communicate with external customers, suppliers, partners. Because again, I think that's becoming very evident for people. It's about how do we talk to people outside of our business going forward, not just internal communication. You know, it's a bit different for us as a business because, you know, what we do is, you know, is video, voice and messaging. So we've been using these technologies as part of our daily lives. But even then, though, we've brought on a number of new employees. And that's created a bit of a challenge because, you know, I have one particular individual in my team. You know, he's been here now, 8 months. He's only actually met the team once in person. So we have to find ways to bring him into engaging with the team, but also engaging with content within the business. So video conferencing might be one way. You know, sharing of information on messaging might be another way. How do we part information to the wider community as a one-way message? Probably a little bit like what I'm doing today at the moment, where it's more of a webinar type experience. So, you know, again, that's going to be important. If organizations are going to bring new people on, different locations, they've got to think about how they bring them into a business. But I keep coming back to, for me, the culture has to support that. I think, unfortunately, if anyone feels that the way of the world in terms of how business was done previously, that we're going to go back to that world and that environment, I think, unfortunately, we're probably a little bit wrong, because I think this is here to stay. And we have to look at how these technologies are implemented to benefit the user, and we have to learn from experiences of other people. And that's what we're trying to do, is trying to share some of those experiences. So what are the lessons that have been learned and what is the future? I think the honest answer is things that we've seen, as I said, organizations have implemented technology solutions that don't meet necessarily the user requirements, probably a bit complex in terms of that capability. I think there's also been a bit of a mentality of businesses going for, shall we call them, some of the world's largest technology vendors, and biggest isn't always the best, in all honesty. So I think that's where people are revisiting that, and I've touched on it, is what is the future? And I think the future is that of a hybrid working culture that is driven from the top, using technology to enable people to do their daily roles, both internally within the organization, but also externally to the organization. So they're really, I guess, the four elements of the sort of discussion. Very briefly about who we are. This isn't about a sales exercise for Starleaf, but I think, if I asked you to remember one thing about who we are and what we do, it's, we are an organization that prides itself on delivering a secure, reliable, simple and easy to use solution that's focused on that user experience, that can provide that good quality experience both internally and externally. We're very, very proud, and we take very seriously being a trustworthy business around security and data protection, because that's becoming ever more important in, unfortunately, the world we live in today. It's about how you're using these technologies, where is your information stored, and where is your data stored. So, if you are using some of the largest technology vendors, for instance, if you're using Microsoft Teams or you're using Zoom, and the feeling that you get from your user community is it's too complex, it's not simple to use, just think Starleaf. That's where we feel we can help. So hopefully that gives you some ideas and some thoughts. I'm happy to take any questions now if anyone wants to pose any questions. So thank you. Okay, I'm not sure, do we have any questions at all?
So if anyone has got any questions, so please feel free to post them in the chat, and I'll relay it back to Stephen. So it seems Dr. Fernando has a question. So Dr. Fernando, could you please post the question in the chat, and we'll go from there.
You can ask me anything, whatever you wish to ask, feel free.
So Stephen, so Stephen Britton wants to know, what common requirements do you think organizations have missed?
I think the common requirements are focusing on purely internal communication versus internal and external communication going forward. I think the other common requirement is people have looked at implementing solutions primarily right now for remote workers. I think what's going to happen, and we've seen it in other countries where they've implemented a technology that is purely for internal comms. And what we're seeing happen in other countries is where people are going into offices. What they're then doing is they're getting meeting invites to other video conferencing technologies, and they've got a problem because they don't have the flexibility within the solution that they've implemented to be able to, from a meeting room, connect to other vendor technologies. It's a bit easier when you're on your laptop, but it's not simple for a user. You know, you might be running Microsoft Teams, you might be running Starleaf, you might be running GoToMeeting, you might be running Zoom. And if anyone's sort of smiling at the fact that you might be joining multiple different types of meetings on any one given day, I think that pain point is going to accelerate when people go back into offices. And that's why we've implemented something called multi-join. You know, it's really simple. It's that, you know, if you're in an office and you get invited to a meeting, which is not the platform that you use, you can forward that meeting invite to the room system, join with a simple click of a button. Again, it comes back to not being about technology. I think that's definitely one of the biggest things we're going to see. What else do I think that people have missed? I do think that even now, people aren't giving enough consideration to their working environment. And what I mean by that is, you know, and some people, you know, it is impossible, right? Some people, unfortunately, are working at dining room tables because they don't have the space, perhaps, for a study or anything. But you know, should be looking at simple things like, have you got enough light in the room? You know, have you got enough, you know, ventilation? You know, can you open a window, or have you got a fan, or whatever it may be? But lighting in its own can make a very simple difference. You know,
That's true.
You know, one of the things that we've implemented is like blurred backgrounds. And why do we do it? Because people were joining from spaces where they might have a bookcase behind, it's very busy, or you know, it's a bit of a messy room. We put a blurred background on it. Helps, you know, it helps with those things. But absolutely, good lighting is good. And actually something that's a bit personal that people can see. A huge Lego collection behind, right? And an awful lot of people on that comment on that, but it's because you're seeing into my personal world. So yeah, I think external communications, going back into the office, is probably one of the biggest things. I think everyone feels like I've got what we need right now, then suddenly people are going to go back into offices and go, oh, hold on a minute, how do I join to that? How do I think about this? How do I connect to this meeting over here? And that's going to put another spin on this whole hybrid working scenario.
Yeah, that
So
makes
hopefully
sense.
that answers the question.
Yeah, so hope this is helpful, Stephen. So the next question comes from Omot, who wants to know, how can companies narrow the scope in making the future workspace suitable for companies with around 7,000 staff?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I take that question as you're probably considering what that working environment looks like in terms of types of spaces and footprint of real estate. I think the honest answer is go and ask your users. What do they want from you as a business? You know, do they envisage that there won't be a requirement for lots of 5, 6, 8-person meeting rooms? Do they think that they're going to collaborate using smaller spaces? You know, I have a personal view on open plan office. I think there will still be an element of that, but I can see lots of organizations having lots of little pods where people can go and work, and they might have a screen and a desktop video conferencing system, or bring your own device capability. So I think what we'll also see is where there might have been a central group of offices, I don't know, London, Birmingham, Manchester perhaps, maybe what you'll see is a smaller footprint in those locations, but more of a diverse geographical location opening up, because people are now used to not doing perhaps the traveling that they want to do. But I'm going to ask the user community, what do you want? What kind of environment can we give you that's going to allow you to get the most from working within our business? Because that will give two things. It will show you that it will show that user community that you're trying to help them understand what they will get, and they'll value it. I would go and ask them. Absolutely, very simple quick questionnaire. What do you envisage the meeting rooms or your office being like, office of the future and hybrid working being? And then you can take that, do the analysis and feed it back into your culture, because the culture of the company might not fit what your staff are saying. That's a different conversation naturally, but go and ask the users. Absolutely go and ask the users, what do they want? So
Makes sense. So next question comes from Michael, who wants to know your thoughts. So what do you think? Why do you think there is an aversion to individuals appearing on video when a lot of communication is through seeing body language?
yeah, it's an interesting one, that one, because you know we always do when we join video conferences, we will always ask the person to join on video. So why don't people do it? I think there's a number of reasons, in all honesty. I think that there's a technology element and there's a personal element. So let me talk about both. I think people are uncomfortable in certain circumstances of being seen within their personal environment. And that's where something as simple as a blurred background can help, because all that user on the other end or groups of users see is that person. They don't see behind the rest of them, right? So it blanks that whole scenario out. So I think that is a simple thing that has probably made quite a significant difference. So I think there's definitely a confidence thing there. I think on the technology front, you know, I probably give a great example of this. An individual member of my team, the one actually that joined 8 months ago, he's got 5 children, right? And his 5 children, and in any one time in his house, they will be using Starleaf, Lifesize, Microsoft Teams, Google, and Zoom. Now, I got pretty good broadband, but actually the reality is if you've got a lot of people that are using video conferencing or other things like Xboxes, etc., people don't want to put video on because it actually consumes, in some respects, for certain vendors, huge amount of bandwidth. So, you know, Wi-Fi plays a part in all of this. You know, I live in a circle, and yesterday, an BT Openreach fan come across into the circle, and I was like, oh God, okay, what's going on? And your sort of natural reaction is, oh no, is it going to affect my broadband? So I think if you're implementing technologies, and that's where we are very, you know, again, proud of what we do, we're using low bandwidth but high quality, because again, it shouldn't be about the technology, you know, the infrastructure that sits behind this. So there's a technology element and there's a personal element. You know, one of the things that we've been able to do with the tools that we provide as part of our solution is where people have had those challenges, we've been able to indicate and pinpoint where those problems might exist, so that the IT team within that organization can help that, you know, particular individual, as an example, right? So yeah, it's 2 parts to me, but you know, to the point of human, you know, body language, etc. You know, there's obviously a number of different studies that, you know, you get a certain amount of messaging, whether it's on the phone, whether it's, you know, over video and in person. I think every organization where they are using or they have the capability to use video conferencing should use it, because you really get that sense of who you're talking to. Naturally, don't pick up quite as much as you would do in person, but you know, if you've got that ability, use it with the person that you're talking to and ask them openly, would you mind putting your video on, right? I don't think that's a question that can be seen as obtrusive, and I'm sure most people will be prepared to do it. You might actually see that somebody joins video and they might not actually, they might be struggling, you know, they might be finding this all quite emotionally intensive. So actually, by encouraging the use of being able to see people, it's very valuable right now from a mental health perspective. So long-winded way of answering it, but I think it's really actually quite important that if you've got that capability, use it. That's what it's there for. And if you can't use it to the best of its ability, you've got to question why you've implemented that technology if it's stopping you from seeing that body language of the person that you're talking to or people that you're talking to. Don't let the technology stop you doing it. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. So next question comes from Rowan, who wants to know, with businesses having faced an overnight shift to move, do you think businesses who think life will return to as it was and who don't agree that remote working is now a firm part of the world are just putting off the inevitable?
I think that there will be organizations that feel like they can go back to their previous culture. I think that there will be a significant push from the employees against that belief. I think that the organizations that don't embrace this hybrid working culture, they will struggle with employee retention. I think they will struggle with attracting new members of staff, new talents. I think that, you know, again, this is a personal view. I think that if people believe that the world is going to go back to quite the way it was, I think we're probably surely mistaken. So I think it's here to stay, but I think people have got to ingrain that into the culture of their business. How do they want to work? Where do they want people to work, etc., etc. So you know, there's obviously benefits in reduction of floor space for office that could gain, you know, organisations could gain benefits of, but you know, I still think a presence and a place for people to feel part of something will be important. So yeah, I think it's here to stay. It's just how well is a business prepared to accept that adoption of the hybrid working, but realise that that's not just internal, that is external. You know, how can they be more productive? You know, how can they see more people perhaps they didn't see before, etc. You know, if you look at one example of that, you know, right now is the NHS. You know, we have 100 NHS trusts using Starleaf, and they use it because it's simple and easy to use and it's reliable and secure, you know, all the core messages for us. But, you know, one of the things that they've got to do is, you know, the patients' waiting lists are getting longer and longer and longer because of obviously COVID. So they're being forced to think about embracing some of these technologies. So they've got to come with an open arms approach, and they've got to think about what it is they're trying to do and how that is going to benefit the person that they're having the consultation with. So I think it's here to stay, but it's got to be embraced in the right manner, embedded in that culture. Otherwise, I think organisations will lose the staff and talent potentially, because people may not want to travel and they may take other roles that perhaps aren't paid so well because they don't have to have the travel element perhaps they thought they had previously. So there's lots of things there, but it's here to stay. We've got to find a way, and people have got to, you know, find a way to adapt. So,
all right. So then, yeah, thank you. So, Stephen, so Jennifer has got a two, and she wants to know question one. So, to what extent have presentation skills had to change in the remote working environment? And the second part of the question is, how can we help people overcome the embarrassment of being video?
okay. So, Jennifer, both good questions. I think, again, you know, there's a couple of things. It has changed, you know, whether it's presenting, whether it's how you hold a meeting, whether it's the duration of the meeting that you hold. I think that's an interesting one, actually, in terms of presenting and duration of meetings. One thing that we found is, you know, rightly or wrongly, you don't perhaps have the chit chat that you perhaps do at the beginning of a meeting when it's on video. They seem to be shorter, sharper, perhaps a bit snappier. But one of the things that we've seen is perhaps too much back-to-back meetings. So people are doing more shorter meetings, but lots more of them. I've been guilty of that, and I find that exceptionally. You know, I've had weeks where I've like, you know what, I just need to get up get away from my desk, have a bit of a break, get some fresh air. So that's definitely some advice on that. In terms of presenting, I think that it's really how you present. And what I mean by that is we're in a webinar right now, okay? And one thing that I find really interesting, but honestly really tough about webinars, I cannot see any of you. All I can see is my screen in this one slide. I have no idea what your reaction is. I don't know if you're sitting there drinking wine, or you're watching the TV, or you're smiling at me, or you're laughing at me, or you're waving, or whatever it may be. And I think when you talk about presenting, I think think about the medium in which you present. So I was chatting to the gents before we joined this call, actually. One of the things that we've done is we've implemented something called Spotlight. And Spotlight is what it says. It shows me to the audience, but on a video conference, you can see everyone else. Now, okay, if you get lots of people on there, it's lots of small images, but if you're presenting, you need to feed off the vibe of the audience. I find that really, really tough in a webinar, whereas if I was on with a group of people and I can see their reaction, I can then see, oh, does that message relate to that person? There we go. Which comes back to one of the previous questions about the body language interaction. So, so hopefully it sort of answers it, Jennifer. But I think it's about the medium which you use and how you present. For me, if I'm presenting, it's got to be a two-way interaction. I'm sitting here staring at the screen, and I'm hoping you're liking what I'm sharing as my thoughts. On that part of, how can we encourage people, to use video conferencing and turn on the camera? Maybe if you meet somebody, ask them, why don't you? It's not an evasive question. Is there something that, you need to feel a bit more confident and comfortable about that we can help you with as an organization to make you feel more confident and comfortable on video? But, I think it comes back to that culture, the type of meeting. And I would always say, sadly, at the beginning, again, it's a bit different for us because we do it, it's natural, but we've done it with suppliers. It'd be really great if you could turn on your video. And actually, just by asking people, the people that weren't on video, you might get 50% more, and then other people turn it on video, etc. If you're doing training and you're using video conferencing, for me, an absolute must is you need to see those people, because you need to see what information is going in to different people. So it doesn't hurt to ask. That's what video conferencing is about, is being able to see people. So hopefully that answers that as well, Jennifer.
Right. Thank you, Stephen. So it seems like we've got quite a few questions. So interested folks, interesting folks who want to know more about video conferencing and such. So moving right along. So we got a question from Dr. C. Fernando, who asks, could you comment on protecting commercial secrets during web-based communication?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a couple of ways to answer that. It's becoming more and more important because of the world we live in, that data security and integrity plays a key part in communications and video conferencing. I think the general consensus is not being taken quite seriously by people. I touched on our view about being a trustworthy business. What does that mean? When you're looking at the solutions that you've implemented or you're implementing, look at their ISO 27001 accreditation, see if they are transparent about where your data is being stored. Because again, messaging is a really interesting subject, is where is people's messaging being stored when you're talking cross-organization, who owns that data? So I think the research into that is important. We are very, very open about that as an organization. It's advertised on our website. All of our security policies, our accreditations, they are all there. They're all visible. Because unfortunately, there's been instances with, one major video conferencing vendor where it was discovered that data was being passed via China. Okay, that's unfortunate, and it's not a way we believe it should be by any stretch. But get a view, just do a little bit of research. For me, if the information is visible about things like security, then it's quite transparent about who they are as an organization. But go and ask and challenge that organization. There's some subtle other things that you can do. Obviously, there's been a lot again about Zoom bombing. Obviously that relates to specific meeting passwords being continuously used, and they become available for other people to join those meetings. One of the things that we've done, if this was on a Starleaf, video conference call, video conferencing session, sorry, you would get an individual meeting ID for that meeting, which again adds a layer of protection and security. Make sure things like passwords are in place. But I do come back to look at the organization's security credentials. Are they visible with that information? Do they publicize it openly? Because that should give you an element of comfort. I think if anyone's hiding that information, it's, we're all in a world right now with data protection and, sharing of information. I think the more that is embedded or hidden, then the more questions we should be asking ourselves, is that really the organization that we want to work with?
Yeah, that makes sense. So next question comes from Bill, who wants to know the big issue with new employees, training and integration into a team. Any suggestion?
Bill, it's hard, right? I think there's no two ways about that. I think what you've got to do is a couple of things. I think that you've got to communicate with those individuals using multiple technologies, video conferencing being one, webinars being another, podcasts being another, chat sessions. I'm personally not a huge fan of do not disturb. I think it's, you're either there or you're not there. So I think you've got to look at the methods of communication, but also, you've got to have time for those individuals so that they feel that they can come and ask questions, that there is an open line of communication, that they can call individuals within an organization when they're available. I know it's a really simple thing, but access to diaries so people can see when people are free and available is another simple thing. One thing that we do every 2 weeks, we call it a working lunch. We did a few quizzes at the beginning. I think most people did quizzes and stuff, but just sit and eat together. How you getting on? What's going on? How do you feel? Doesn't need to be about work. How's things? How you feeling? One of the guys in the team, he likes to go for a run. Sorry, one of the girls in our team, Lillian, she likes to go for a run. She's doing a bit for charity. Lil, tell us a bit about the charity. Start bringing them into that culture of the organisation, and let them meet different people. But do it. You can do it one or two ways. I sort of did it slightly differently in one instance where it was, okay, well, these are the people. You go arrange a session. Or we've had other instances where perhaps the person is not so outgoing, where we go, right, we booked some individual sessions with you to meet this person, and we leave them to it and let them start to build that rapport and relationship as best they possibly can. I personally am a great fan of, giving somebody, right, well, these are the people that you need to meet within the business. They know that you're going to call. You go and arrange it. You almost, in the nicest possible way, you force them to start a communication rather than the communication coming back. But again, it's a bit about the nature of the individual. So if you are interviewing people, think about the type of person, how that might work when they, if you offer them the position, is how would that be best done? But quick 20-minute podcast, got a bit of learnings here. but always give them, always check in on them. How you getting on? How you feeling? Do feel free, come talk to me. I'm here. But, a big thing for me personally is about creating a team culture. So, I think that's really important as well. It's about making them feel of a part of a team. So again, lots of answers to that, but hopefully it gives you some thoughts, but a bit of freedom to communicate and think about how they might benefit. Ask them what's their learning style. That's a really good one, actually. What is your learning style? How do you learn? How do you absorb information? Now, personally, I hate sitting reading. I'd rather talk to somebody about something. So, if somebody said to me that, I was starting a new position 6 months' time, and they said, now I've got to go through all of these online courses, probably wouldn't be for me. Whereas if it was more of a bit of a video classroom interaction, brilliant, sounds great. So it's all about that learning style and culture. Hopefully that'll give you some ideas as well. So
I think it's more about like trying to simulate interpersonal communication as much as you can, isn't it, Stephen?
it is, yeah. But again, it's that type of communication and how you do it. What method
Sure.
that you use to share or part information. Is it one way? Is it two way? Is it a podcast? What, we've uploaded some podcasts when you're out doing your walk at lunchtime or after work, whatever it may be, or you go for your run, go listen to it. That's what you want to do. Don't always make it fixed you've got to go and do it this way. Mix it up a bit, share it about a bit.
That makes sense. So the next question comes from Michael, who wants to know, meetings which are entirely online are easy to manage, and everyone being in a room is fine as well. When you have half the people online and half in an office trying to share one AV source, maybe a single laptop to avoid feedback. Is there a good way of a group of people sharing one speaker or microphone in an office without converting every meeting room into an expensive video conferencing suite?
Interesting perception of expensive video conferencing suites. I think quite candidly, that myth's gone, or it should be gone, because there are now simple, easy to use and easy to implement solutions. We partner with, one of the hardware partners that we provide that our software sits on is Poly. They have a very cost-effective entry point for a video system in a room. With us, obviously our software is sitting on top. I think you've got to look at that's quite interesting, because that sounds more like you might be doing some audio conferencing as well as video. So again, it's about the physical environment that you're in. It's about who runs the meeting, the structure of the meeting, and providing something that's not difficult for the user to use. If you're in a world where you can go in and lots of talk about bring your own device, you plug your laptop in, it pulls the invite from the meeting in your calendar, which is what we do. It puts it on the video system, you press a single green button and you go. That's as simple and straightforward as it should be for a user. I think if it's anything that's more complex than that, come talk to us and I'll give you some honest, feelings and guidance. It's not about expensive video conferencing suites anymore. It shouldn't be. It doesn't need to be like that. So if that's the perception, or if that's what you're being told by somebody, I'd be more than happy to have a chat with you after this.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. So one last question. So it comes from Omot, who wants to know, how can organizations make sure hybrid working is fair among teams so that conflicts would not result among those home working permanently, as opposed to team member who prefers coming in physically? So it's a bit of a team conflict around here. So any thoughts, Stephen?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think, perhaps there's this, I think it's starting to dispel, actually. I think there's this perception that to be seen is to be heard. And that means, that's perhaps meant in the past for some organizations that, they had to be in the office to be seen, to be able to, progress their career, spend time with their manager, etc., or their exec, whatever it may be. I think that, quite candidly, I come back to culture again. If the perception of the culture within the organisation is you've got to be seen to be heard, then I think that will just naturally result in people questioning, do they work for the right business going forward? Because it isn't about being seen to be heard. Again, I've been doing some personal reading. It's not about what activities you do, it's the outcome of those activities. So I think that you've got to look very carefully at your culture. And again, it's got to come from the top, that just because you're in an office doesn't mean to say that you are going to get the better opportunity to go for a promotion or change jobs, because I think that will cause a lot of issues for organizations around discrimination. So I think you've got to look at the culture of the business, and perhaps if that's how people feel, then you need to find a way constructively to raise that within the organisation. But culture's got to support that. For me, you can't have that kind of working environment culture. Just to be seen is to be heard. You can still be on video and be seen and be heard in the right way, right? So.
Yeah, that makes sense. So thank you, Stephen.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you, Stephen, for his great presentation, the role of remote working, and his thoughts on how whether it's going to be norm and the different measures that we as team professionals need to take into consideration moving forward. And thank you to everyone for their unique contribution. I mean, the questions that are, all of which were all interesting and insightful. So this is precisely the kind of engagement that we want to shoot for moving forward. Once again, thank you to Stephen for his brilliant presentation. So once again, on behalf of the BCS Cheltenham and Gloucester branch, I would like to thank everyone for attending our webinar for this month. So we will be setting up a different webinar talk each and every month from here on out. So please be sure to check, keep yourselves updated. So with that, has a good evening, and we will see you all next month. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen.
No problem. Is that all right?
Great. It really opened up a very short and sweet presentation, but that really opened up the floodgates for all the questions, I think, where all the kernel of the discussion was occurring. I think that was really very useful.
It's more let people ask the questions and people start to flow with the questions that they want to ask. So I think it's and it's a balance. Obviously, we're trying to educate around experience, but I'm also trying to promote a little bit with Starleaf, but hopefully it doesn't come across too much. But hopefully that was good and they enjoyed it. Certainly lots of questions, right?
Yeah.
Yep, that's it.
So very interesting questions as well.
Very interesting questions, I say so.
They're interesting because there's there's not one that we haven't seen or heard of. The most interesting one for me is, why don't people join on video? And a lot of it actually, in all honesty, is about technology. It's because some of the technology vendors out there are just using excessive amounts of bandwidth. And when people have got poor connectivity, or they've got multiple people working from home, or they've got kids on Xboxes and stuff like that, they just can't get an acceptable video quality experience, which that's not video conferencing, and that's a myth for anyone that thinks it truly is. All right, well, gentlemen, thank you for letting me do that. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
All right, thank you for your time, Stephen. It was a very good